Behold, the Chinese Communist Party, ruling over a population of 1.4 billion Chinese citizens at home and claiming dominion over a vast Chinese diaspora abroad. The CCP is among the most powerful political forces at work anywhere in the modern world. Over a century after it was founded in the wake of Russia's October Revolution, the Chinese Communist Party boasts over 100 million members within its ranks, one of the world's most powerful economies under its control, and one of the world's most formidable militaries at its fingertips. From the outside, it's an all but unstoppable force, slowly unfolding a master plan that's taken China from poverty to the edge of superpower status over the span of decades. Its leaders are shadowy and enigmatic, its power structures are convoluted and often hidden from view, and its ultimate ambitions are known to its leaders and its leaders alone. But beneath the CCP's calm, calculating veneer lies a brutal and unending struggle for power. Influential factions rise and fall, new ideas and new leaders gain favor at the expense of their predecessors, and those select few who can achieve true dominance will fight to the death in order to keep it. The Chinese Communist Party is not some languid collection of stuffy bureaucrats. It's a crucible shaped by ambition, greed, corruption, and all the cloak and dagger intrigue of a modern-day Game of Thrones episode. On rare, fascinating occasions, the rest of the world could steal a glimpse at the CCP's internal battles for power, so here's what we've learned about the inner workings of a geopolitical force of nature. Like any great story of palace intrigue, the dynamics that play out within the Chinese Communist Party have just as much to do with the system as they have to do with the people. So, to set the terms of engagement, we've got to start with the CCP itself, how it's structured, how it's intended to allow power to flow through it, and how it's supposed to work in an ideal world that doesn't have to account for all of the messy human bits. In the simplest possible terms, the internal hierarchy of the CCP is a pyramid with a tiny number of people holding immense power at the top and more people each holding progressively less power as we travel down through each layer of leadership. But in China, that pyramid comes with an unexpected surprise, a supreme ruling body that only comes together every 5 years with the power, at least in theory, to turn the entire state structure on its head. That ruling body is the National Congress, a collection of about 2,400 high-ranking CCP members that last came together in 2022 and will most likely meet again in 2027. Delegates are sent to the Congress by indirect elections chosen by provincial CCP congresses, screened and dispatched to the Great Hall of the People in Beijing. Over a span of 7 days, the National Congress receives a report from the General Secretary on the successes and failures of the last 5 years of government, plus any ideological changes that have been made to China's state structure during that time. In that speech, the General Secretary lays out a guide to the next 5 years, a meticulously crafted plan that's intended to be followed carefully and that's usually spearheaded by the person who's preparing at that time to take over for China's current leader when they eventually step down. During the 7-day National Party Congress, delegates choose the roughly 370 members of China's Central Committee, a collection of high ministers, bureaucrats, provincial leaders, and military officers who form the basis of Chinese national government. Now, to be clear, the power of the National Party Congress is not quite as absolute as it sounds, but we'll get to that side of the story in just a little bit. The Central Committee, with its 370 high-ranking CCP officials, are the people charged with actually leading China during the 5-year intervals between national congresses. Their members, including about 200 full members and roughly 170 non-voting alternates, are to elect internal leaders, approve or shape large-scale decisions that the Chinese government will undertake, choose the directors of China's largest state-owned enterprises, and otherwise be consulted on the big decisions that will have an outsized impact on the nation. The members oversee the CCP's organization department, its publicity department, and its United Front work department, highly influential bodies that control CCP personnel, propaganda, and the people living under Chinese rule. But the Central Committee doesn't meet particularly often. It does this about once a year on average. Its members have ample responsibilities elsewhere, managing provinces, bureaucratic organizations, military command, civic institutions, and other high-profile posts all across the country. The real power behind the throne in Beijing is the Politburo Standing Committee, or PSC, a selection that currently comprises just 7 of the most senior members of the Central Committee and historically includes somewhere between 5 and 11, always an odd number, for voting reasons. The Standing Committee is the rough equivalent of a cabinet of secretaries or ministers, a full-time body that's meant to comprise China's brightest minds and its most influential leaders. They oversee a sort of second-tier cabinet, the Politburo, currently including 24 members. Because so many of China's mundane or provincial decisions flow in from bureaucratic organizations, provincial leadership structures, or other committees, a large portion of the Standing Committee's time is spent reviewing and either approving, denying, or modifying those decisions before they're put into action. But they're also the closest advisors, chief deputies, and most trusted executors of the man at the top of the CCP, the General Secretary. Despite the rather pedestrian-sounding title, China's General Secretary is the unequivocal highest authority in the CCP, the leader of the party, and thus the head of an unchallenged single-party apparatus that exercises complete control of the nation. The holder of the General Secretary title also holds the title of President, although that's a ceremonial position, and the title of Supreme Commander of the People's Liberation Army. Right now, it's no surprise that that position is held by Xi Jinping, who's been in the post since 2012 and became the first person since Mao Zedong to serve in the role for more than 2 terms. The degree to which the Secretary General controls China, in practice, can vary from leader to leader, and the post is technically open to being influenced by a range of important voices across the CCP. But regardless, the Secretary General is China's highest office, no matter how much higher on the CCP's internal ladder a given General Secretary might seek to become. He enjoys unparalleled access to the CCP's internal levers of power, unparalleled access to the people of China through the media, and unparalleled access to the world with all manner of diplomatic channels and means of travel at his disposal. And yes, for the foreseeable future, China's leaders will be a he. Right now, just 11 of the CCP's 205 permanent Central Committee members are women, reflecting an exceptionally difficult path to the top that's unlikely to get any easier. Beside the strict hierarchy of the CCP's upper leadership, there are a number of important positions and organizations that deserve a mention. China's State Council is headed by the General Secretary and includes a premier, vice premier, and collections of ministers, chairpersons, and other people who function basically as a second cabinet alongside the Politburo. While the Politburo gets veto power over the State Council's decisions, it's much more focused on questions of ideology and guiding vision, whereas the State Council is concerned with practical policy implementation. The Organization Department, which we mentioned before, is directly responsible for all state and party personnel and works as an overt political fixer, elevating rising stars who show promise, squashing personnel who have a tendency to underwhelm, and pulling the strings to create a pool of trusted leaders from whom a smaller section of people can be chosen to actually lead China. The United Front Work Department keeps a tight grip on China's powerful elites, keeping them in line and ensuring that they act in service to the party while simultaneously tracking the global Chinese diaspora, especially people who have risen to important positions in global governments or institutions. The People's Bank of China is responsible for monetary policy. The recently established National Security Commission is a shadowy organization that seems to control the nation's security apparatus, and the National Development and Reform Commission guides and manages the national economy. The one organization that doesn't have much power is the National Legislature, the National People's Congress, which is different from the National Congress that we mentioned before. The People's Congress is basically a rubber stamp organization, meeting once a year for about 2 weeks and passing into law all of the many decisions that China's real power players have already made. And finally, we've got to touch on a few key people besides Xi Jinping who play an outsized role in Chinese politics. Zhao Leji, aged 67, is the chairman of the 7-man Standing Committee and spent years leading China's top anti-corruption bureau, the Central Commission for Discipline Inspection. Li Qiang is the nation's premier, the second most powerful member of the CCP behind only Xi Jinping himself, and both he and Leji are among Xi's most important allies in the entire government. Wang Huning, another important member of the Standing Committee, is believed to have played a key role in the development of Xi Jinping's thought, the Belt and Road Initiative, and a range of other cultural and foreign policy reforms that have shaped the present and future of the CCP. Outside China, Wang is believed to be the man who's shaped and controlled China's guiding ideology since the 1990s, and on the cusp of his 70th birthday, his time in leadership doesn't seem as if it'll end anytime soon. Li Ganji is a rising star within the CCP, currently the youngest member of the Politburo, and currently the head of the United Front Work Department, focusing on the Chinese global diaspora after finishing up his time in another highly influential position, head of the Organization Department. The Organization Department sounds like the most dystopian thing ever. Finally, Zhang Yuxia is the vice chairman of the Central Military Commission and exerts considerable power as the day-to-day leader of the Chinese military. Alright, so that's the official structure of the Chinese Communist Party, but what we've laid out so far hardly scratches the surface. China and its leaders take great care to present a calm, cool demeanor to the outside world, and they benefit greatly from making themselves inscrutable, so that the rest of the world has to rely on subtle signs and signals most of the time in order to get a sense of who's in and who's out in Beijing. But under the surface, factionalism, internal purges, and bitter power struggles are common. To understand how this can look, let's start with an example from before Xi Jinping's time, when in the wake of an era under Deng Xiaoping, the CCP was divided by two factions, the Chinese Communist Youth League and the Shanghai Gang. The two sides traded power back and forth from 1989 until 2014, with the Shanghai Gang producing Jiang Zemin, who led China from 1989 to 2002, and the Youth League faction producing Hu Jintao, who led from 2002 to 2012. The two sides were divided by ideology, geographical origin within China, and vision for the nation, and for quite a while in their early years fighting for power, they spent years undercutting each other, leveraging portions of the state apparatus under their control, and trying to elevate as many key personnel to as many key positions as possible. This was all done in order to preserve their power and give themselves the best possible shot at staying ahead. By the early 2000s, however, the Youth League faction and the Shanghai Gang were able to settle into an equilibrium, working out power-sharing agreements and joining together to work out mutually agreeable policies to serve their respective constituent bodies. But all of that changed when Xi Jinping took over in 2012. Xi came up as a member of the Shanghai Gang, and although his first couple of years of leadership didn't represent too massive a divergence from the bipartisan order, that all changed once Xi had enough time to work. Under Xi, that period of relatively low infighting came to a close in favor of a far more cutthroat way of doing business that's characterized Xi's time in power. Nor did Xi just consolidate power for the Shanghai Gang. Instead, he created and then grew a third faction, bearing direct loyalty to him instead of either side. First, it was the Youth League faction that found itself in the crosshairs, iced out of political decision-making whenever possible, pressured out of China's most influential posts, and at times removed unilaterally. Then, the time came for the Shanghai Gang members who were deemed insufficiently loyal, less than competent, or otherwise unable to provide what Xi needed. In their place, and leveraging his control of China's organization department, Xi has ensured that his own loyalists, collectively known as the Xi Gang, take over posts as they become available. That change has taken place everywhere, from the highest levels of party governance to low-level provincial and bureaucratic postings. Anywhere there's a Xi loyalist available, they're likely to find themselves in charge of their little pocket of China sooner or later. As for Xi's motivations, they were partly ideological, partly authoritarian, and far too complicated to be properly summed up in this video. But, let us know if you'd like us to tackle Xi himself in a future episode. It would be a long one. The wave of Xi Jinping didn't just come with a wave of loyalists filling out positions across the government. Xi has also ushered in a second change that's defined his time at the top, the return of large-scale, regular government purges. Under Xi, purges tend to focus on two key elements of the Chinese government, the military and the highest levels of internal bureaucracy. Those purges are done quietly, sometimes with official announcements that a certain general or overseer has been removed from their position without further explanation, but usually with so little fanfare that the rest of the world learns about their ouster only when familiar faces fail to show up at important party events. Those purges tend to come in large waves, one of which is actually ongoing right now, and they do not spare seemingly critical personnel. In 2024, 8 of the 205 members of China's Central Committee were purged, and 11 others seem to have been in some serious hot water, together comprising almost 10% of China's most important political bodies. Also in 2024, Xi purged his highest admiral, 2 critical generals, and the deputy commander of China's ground forces. When China gives any reason for its purges, the justification usually has to do with corruption, which is indeed an endemic problem all up and down China's military and civilian leadership. On those charges, Xi has purged even some of the people considered to be his closest political allies or his most devoted internal loyalists, including his foreign minister and his defense minister, both removed from office in 2023. But they've also been a convenient way to get rid of people from other internal factions who've managed to survive deep into Xi's tenure while still having some chance of becoming a rival one day. Of course, that's not to say that Xi has turned the CCP into a completely unified faction. Far from it. In fact, his own loyalists are split into 2 internal groups, one referred to as the New Zhejiang Army and the other referred to as the Fujian Clique. The Fujian Clique is made up mostly of people who knew Xi way back in the day when they helped him to govern the province of Fujian through 2002. They've largely taken up positions in the military and security sector, while some of the senior-most members now serve as part of Xi's 7-man standing committee. The new Xinjiang army, by contrast, are ideological loyalists, people who've really taken to Xi's political philosophy and then worked overtime to show that they're willing to put Xi's plans into action. As such, they're more frequently present in positions where they can further ideological goals and maintain control over party infrastructure. Smaller sub-factions have followed Xi ever since his time in his own province of Shanxi, or even since his time at university. An interrelated but fundamentally separate rivalry splits China's civil administration and its military leadership, each jockeying for power despite the fact that the Chinese military is technically beholden to its civil leaders. Then there are the other influential groups across China, the social elite, the oligarchy, and provincial or even local leaders with powerful factions of their own. China's social elite, much to what we imagine would be Mao Zedong's chagrin, is made up of an outside proportion of people whose families have been privileged before the rise of the Communist Party, with the descendants of people who were purged in the Cultural Revolution now having regained much of their wealth and status. Then there are the oligarch class, the super-rich, including tech leaders like the seemingly redeemed Jack Ma, e-commerce leader Colin Huang, Tencent co-founder Ma Huateng, and electronics magnate Lei Jun. Other major oligarchs include multi-billionaires like Chen Dongsheng, Zhong Shanshen, and the wealthiest man in China today, ByteDance founder Zhang Yiming. Finally, those who find themselves at the heads of China's wealthiest provinces like Guangdong, Shandong, or Jiangsu, or at the heads of wealthy cities like Shanghai or Shenzhen, they benefit from massive bureaucracies under their control. Those bureaucracies come complete with incredible levels of funding, influence over all kinds of major institutions, and control over the lives of tens of millions of people. Each of the factions that we've mentioned have their own means at their disposal to consolidate power and wealth, push out their rivals, or otherwise elevate their position. But if they're going to play power games, then they've got to strike a very careful balance and ensure that they don't make themselves a problem for higher party leadership, or at worst, Xi himself. That means that anyone trying to be a power player in China has to do it without making anybody more powerful than themselves, worried that they're trying to become a rival, while also ensuring that their machinations don't lead to side effects that would be seen as them inhibiting the functions of the party or its wider government, while also avoiding the possibility that they could be seen as ideological dissidents, Western traitors to the system, or some other type of unwanted agitator. That is a careful balance to get right, and occasional, inevitable missteps can only be partially rescued by leaning on connections with influential people. Instead, the preferred approach of most internal actors seems to be a two-step solution. Lay low unless a winnable fight presents itself, and build reserves of financial capital. For anyone in the CCP, or in its periphery, a large share of its wealth is going to be tied up in the Chinese banking system or in hard or digital assets where they're subject to seizure or meddling from the CCP's most important people. But a large portion of the wealth of powerful or influential Chinese leaders is spread across the globe, held in offshore accounts so that they're invulnerable to the push and pull of domestic infighting. Far from the preferred conduct of the glitzy American or European super-rich, powerful Chinese families have considerable incentives to squirrel away their wealth, conceal it from view, and save it for when they might need it most. In part, that's a recognition of the sensitivity of their place in Chinese society, where any power they hold is at the pleasure of Xi Jinping, but where getting too close to Xi today could very well see them purged by Xi's successor tomorrow. It's China's public oligarch class, largely made up of tech and electronics leaders, that tend to happily soak up attention and disclose their stunning range of assets, while the Chinese old money families that have either kept their fortunes safe through decades of upheaval or rebuilt what they used to have would never be caught doing so. To be clear, the newer oligarchs are likely hiding a portion of their wealth too, even if it's not quite as much of a way of life as it is for families who know firsthand just how intense Beijing's reprisals can be. A large portion of China's offshore financial holdings are their assets, not the direct assets of the Chinese government. That sets up a fascinating grey space where China's offshore war chest overlaps with the holdings of people planning to stay rich long after Xi Jinping inevitably becomes a memory. As financial liquidity expert Adam Russell explained in a recent article, that offshore money props up yet another layer of China's internal power dynamic, what Russell called, quote, a self-reinforcing shadow sovereignty. That is to say, it props up a collection of oligarchs, party elites, and even semi-criminal networks that push against the boundaries of what China will permit when funneling money from the rest of the world to itself. Those vast sums of money can be loyal to China, but they don't have to be. And whether or not they are depends on the incentives and objectives of the people who actually control those hidden accounts. And it's here that the outer edge of Chinese power politics begins to take shape, where seemingly innocuous elites, dusty old party officials, or regional leaders can hide massive reserves of capital, drawing upon it as needed to give themselves a decisive advantage in what would otherwise be tightly contested political rivalries. This is where the portion of China's wealthy and powerful who've amassed that wealth and power through less than legal means are able to buy their way into China's legitimate political structure, purchasing loyalty and influencing decisions to their benefit. It's where money that represents people who disdain Xi Jinping and could even seek to challenge him can be hidden behind shell corporations layered through multiple stages of proxy ownership, guarded by the financial institutions of other nations, and kept safe in the event that its owners are found out and purged from the system. Quoting Adam Russell again, "Inside China, elite interests are deeply fragmented. Party leaders in Beijing strive to keep a tight grip, pushing grand ideological projects and enforcing strict discipline. Yet beneath them, provincial networks focus on their own survival and enrichment, prioritizing regional patronage webs and local power dynamics. Meanwhile, private capital, the tech tycoons, property moguls, and SOE-adjacent billionaires operate with a different logic altogether, seeking to transform vulnerable domestic wealth into safer, untouchable offshore assets." End quote. And by the way, credit to Russell here for the idea of Chinese internal politics as a sort of Game of Thrones analogues. That's a somewhat common analogy, but Russell especially does a nice job laying it out. It's these complex, well-hidden financial networks that fuel China's continual internal rivalries, that prevent Xi Jinping and his inner circle from establishing complete control, and that ensure the survival of elite factions outside Beijing's direct control. And to be clear, Beijing knows full well that this network exists. We've mentioned throughout this episode the existence of the United Front Work Department, an official party institution that's tasked with bringing Chinese elites and the global Chinese diaspora under direct control. This semi-state-affiliated financial network is quite literally the reason for their existence. The United Front Work Department is meant to create a unified front among Chinese power players and ensure that they work to Beijing's benefit, including by force if necessary. All the while, the Chinese leaders who are engaged in this game of cat and mouse try to make careful use of their assets whenever they can, influencing China's sprawling political system as it tries to regain control over them. And it's here that we can finally step back to get a grand view of China's internal power dynamics, a cutthroat party architecture where everything is a double game, balanced between support of the party and support of one's own interests. It's a system in which the interests of every powerful person are intertwined with the interests of all their peers, where a rigid one-party political hierarchy doesn't favor open debate, but machination and secrecy. Power bases and influence networks have to be airtight before even the most carefully considered of power moves, and every person who chooses to participate in the system has multiple targets on their back, from people above their station who would ensure they don't become rivals, people below their position who take what they have in a heartbeat, and people who command relatively equivalent power but know that they can only get further by orchestrating someone else's downfall. It is incredibly intense, it's only ever high stakes, and for those who play it best of all, the rising superpower they call home can become the ultimate prize. Thank you for watching.